Hi and welcome, my name is Lawrence Baker. This video is going to be about the tone curve inside Lightroom. Now, I'm going to say from the straight off that this is my least favorite tool inside Lightroom, but I'm going to go through it anyway and show you it can be useful in certain circumstances, but its problem lies with the size of this box and getting the precision that you need to make changes to your image. Anyway, let's start with the basic panel first, because this will give you an overview of how you're restricted in the basic panel to the areas of tonality you can adjust. Now, here on the right, that's the whites and that's the blacks. So we're going from white to black, right to left. So that's the whites, that's the highlights, that's the exposure. Though if you play around with the exposure slider a lot, you can darken or whiten up your image completely because it's a gamma slider. I won't explain that now, but I'll show you what the slider does in a minute. That is shadows and that is blacks. So if I move the highlights around, I'm not really going outside of this thin area here. Obviously there's a slight knock-on effect on the whole histogram, but it's not as powerful as the tone curve tool. I'm going to Command or Control Z on that to get back to where I was. But with the exposure slider, you can darken the image right off. Not completely, so I can Command Z and undo that change. Again, I can whiten it right off as well. There is some detail left, but you can see from the histogram, I've just got a tiny bit because that's what a gamma slider does. And I won't cover it in this video, as I said, because it's quite complex. Now, Command or Control Z to get back to where we were. So with the basic panel, you're limited to certain areas, except with the exposure slider. But as I said, that's not going to be much use to you. You only move the exposure slider by small amounts, in my opinion, or you should do. Right. Let's go to the tone curve. By the way, I'm in solo mode. If you right click on a header of a panel, you can turn it on and off. So if I tick solo mode off now, I can have more than one panel open at once. But as I show you, I can have lens corrections and tone curve open. If I right click again and go solo mode, I've only got one panel on. Quick heads up there, I just thought I'd show it to you. Right, this is the normal mode that you come into when you use the tone curve. There's two modes to it. It's the point curve mode and the normal mode. Now, as you see, it's got the same sliders almost as the basic panel has got. It's got lights and darks. So we've got shadows and highlights. So you can see what areas of the image you're working on. This tool is very intuitive in the way it works. Now, these are the highlights. These are sort of the midtones or lights or darks, and they're the shadows. The bottom axis is where you are now. The vertical axis is where you're going to be when you move this around. So if you drag upwards there, I'm brightening the image up in the highlights region. If I drag downwards, I'm dragging the darks down. Now that's a standard S-curve, which is used a lot with the curves tool inside Photoshop to give an image more contrast. So I don't actually like what I'm looking at, but you get what I can do with it. Now I can also move the sliders in certain areas, so I can move it back up and bring back some of the shadows back. The reason it gives you more control than the basic panel is you can actually expand the range of, let's say, the lights or the darks. So if I reset this now by right clicking and go and reset all, I can reset the tool completely. Now, if I, let's say, wanted the shadows to have a wider area of tonality to play with, I could do this now. So if I start playing around with shadows, it's actually moving it from the point I've moved this down to. You'll see some figures here, and they're obviously just for info, and you can turn them off, but it's basically showing you remapping the tonality of the image. It's just a percentage move, really, and I wouldn't take much notice of it. So anyway, I was playing around with the shadows. I can brighten the shadows up like that quite a lot, so I've expanded the range of the tonality. Now, if you right-click, you've got reset regions. All it does is just flatten the curve off. It's not a very intuitive tool in this respect with these things like splits. So if I reset the splits, I've got the splits back. But if I do that change again where I move those shadows down or make the shadows smaller or whatever, I'm going to drag it up. And now if I right click again and go reset regions, which is flattened off the curve, but it hasn't changed the splits. So that's a difficult thing to get in your head. If I go reset splits, it puts them back to their default settings. So region will flatten off the curve here, but it won't change these settings which are the splits. And I was a bit confused, they call it region here, but they're the splits between the regions. So I hope you've got that in your head. Now, if I do something stupid, now I can't get too stupid with this tool because it won't allow me to, because it's constrained to these areas. You can't drag down like you can with the point curve tool a hell of a lot, so you're kind of constrained a bit. You can see the histogram in the background, and that is really quite crucial, but it doesn't show up very well in this tool, and that's why I don't like it as well. And I find it very hard to be precise in such a small box. But anyway, I'm going to right click and go reset all. Now you notice there's reset point curve there, because if you're inside the point curve, which is here, when you click on that, you might not know what's gone on inside that point curve. So you can reset the point curve here. And of course, reset all will reset everything. I say the figures are there really for a bit of fun. I don't think, unless you're really geeky, you're not going to really look at them too much. That really is the tone curve, or the normal one, covered, except for two little bits. There's the target adjustment tool, which is one of my favorite tools because it only works on the area you drag up and down in. So you drag it up and down. So dragging down will always make it darker in this respect. So I'm dragging down those darks, I'm making the image a lot darker. Now if I dragged up there, I can make the whites a lot brighter. So you get the idea. That's the target adjustment tool. I'm going to right click and go reset all. And the other one is you've got two little presets. Linear is the normal mode. It's a linear line, a straight line. Medium contrast, which is a sort of S-curve there. And if you want strong contrast, more of an S-curve, slightly brighter in the highlights, slightly darker in the shadows than the medium contrast. Right, I'm going to reset this now. Reset all. Go to the point curve tool. Now this gives you far more power than the ordinary tone curve tool, because you can work in red, green or blue, the color channels. That's RGB, which is the composite color channel. If you hear that bandied about, that's what it means. It's your normal view. You've got the target adjustment tool, but what you can do is add control points to the tone curve. Now, in the old days of Photoshop, we used to tie down our tone curve. And what do I mean by that? Well, you just click across it like as many places as you can, so you can have great control over your image. Let's say I'll put another one in there by pulling up just in that area. It doesn't really affect too much the other areas. Now, if I put a point curve, if it did, I just put another point curve in. So it can be quite useful for just playing around with small areas. Now, it's a difficult tool to control. I'm using a mouse, but I normally have a Wacom tablet, and with the Wacom tablet, it's even more difficult. So it doesn't say a lot about this tool's precision, but it doesn't allow you to be very precise. Now, tying down the tone curve, or this line, is quite common. So I'm going to right click on that, and all I've got is delete the last control point, which you can see it's done, and then flatten curve. So you don't have the same amount of settings that you do in the normal tone curve. And plus, as I said, inside the normal tone curve, you can reset this point curve. It's quite useful to remember that. I could use the target adjustment tool to show you what I can do with this image. I can really play around with this. If you like that type of thing, that's fine. I don't. Now, I would really normally do this inside Photoshop. Here, it's a bit of a gimmick, really. So I'm going to reset it and go flatten curve. The other choices it gives you, you can play around with the color channels. Now, playing around with color channels is not as straightforward as you might think. It doesn't mean you're changing the luminosity inside that color channel as you think you might. So if I go to red and I drag down, I'm actually moving towards green. And that's what happens because the opposite of red is green in the color world. So I don't want to go into color theory here too much, but if I drag it up, it would, as I say, make it more red. But if I drag it down and make it more green, you're taking the reds out of the image, so it's being replaced with green. It's not a bad effect, actually. I quite like that. Yeah. Well, anyway, if I reset it, flatten curve, and go to green, and do the same thing, I drag down, I'm making it redder. Now, it's quite a difficult concept to get in your head because it's math, really, but just take my word for it. If you drag down any of these colours, you'll get another colour. I'm getting magenta, actually. You get the idea, guys. Playing around the colour channels is not as straightforward as you might think. Let's play around with blue and see what it does. It's adding in yellow. So you can add luminosity to the colour going that way, but going back down, making it darker, actually puts a color cast into the image. I believe inside Lightroom, it's not as useful as the tool inside Photoshop. And I think I would do this type of editing inside Photoshop. But as I said, you can tie down the point curve, and most people used to click like this across the curve, and I would add tons in if I wanted to really play around. So let's say I thought those blues are a little bit too dark there. I could put another one there. So you need stuff either side of it. And I know there's detail there, but I could pull that up a bit. It's very difficult to control this tool. I don't like it at all. It doesn't give me the control that its big brother does in Photoshop. Now, I've run down this tool enough. I think you've got the idea of it, guys. It's a little bit confusing sometimes. I'm going to go back there and go right click and reset point curve. So I'll reset the previous tool. It's okay. It gives you a bit more granularity than the ordinary basic panel, but I would say use Photoshop. And this business about regions, splits, it can be really confusing. If I pull that down and right click, I reset the regions, in other words, flatten off the curve. But if I move one of these around and go like that and drag it around, if I right click and go reset regions, it's reset the curve, but it's kept the splits. If I want to reset the splits, I go to reset splits. I think you've got the idea, guys. Now, some people might like this tool, but if people tell you it's their favorite tool or their go-to tool, I think they're bullshitting. Thanks very much, guys.